Hi, this is Danny Doyle, and I really like the Pokemon series. I know, shocker, a neurodivergent nerd likes Pokemon. More at 11. But like many other fans of the franchise, a couple of years ago I started to find the mainline series a bit too easy to hold my attention. The natural place that I went was to Nuzlocking, which injected a bit of that difficulty back into the Pokemon series. But over time, even that was not difficult enough. I moved on to hardcore Nuzlocking, and for many of the games in the series, a hardcore Nuzlocke is also fairly easy to me at this point. The next step was, of course, to look into Nuzlocke variants, but none of them really stood out to me, so I decided to create my own by borrowing elements from one of my other favorite series, the Fire Emblem series. The result is what I'm calling the marlock. And I tried the rule set out on my first ever playthrough of Alpha Sapphire and had a lot of fun with it, despite the fact that that game is generally fairly easy. I figured that some of y'all in my audience might enjoy playing a marlock yourself, so this video is to run down the rules for the challenge run. Because it's based on a Nuzlocke, it uses the standard hardcore Nuzlocke rule set. For those who are unfamiliar, a Nuzlocke is a playthrough where you only catch the first Pokemon you see on each route, and if your Pokemon ever faints, it is dead forever, and must be either released or put into a dedicated death box. The hardcore variant adds the additional rules of no using items in battle, you need to play on set mode, and you can't ever have a Pokemon at a higher level than the next gym leader's ace. I also played with Species Clause, which just means that you can't catch more than one of the same evolution line. Fairly standard stuff, I'm sure most people watching know this, but I wanted to cover my bases in case anyone didn't. Now for the additional rules that turn a Nuzlocke into a marlock. The first rule is to name your character after whatever Fire Emblem character you want, and name your starter after Marth. If Marth ever dies, it is considered a game over, and you must reset the run from the very beginning. The second rule is that each Pokemon you catch after your starter must be named after the Shadow Dragon replacement units in the order you would recruit them. So your first unit is named Unil, the second unit is named Dua, the third one is Trim, etc, etc. The third rule is you cannot ever use the box to bench one of your Pokemon who is alive. Whoever is in your party is stuck in your party until they die. When any of your Pokemon die, instead of getting to choose who replaces them on the team, instead the next replacement unit in order must fill their slot. The final rule is that while you can and are in fact encouraged to strategically intentionally kill off Pokemon to make room for new ones, you cannot engage in optional battles purely for the purpose of killing off a member of your team. If you want to kill Swellow off to make room for Geodude, you're going to have to do it in a mandatory fight. While this obviously isn't to the same difficulty as something like ROM hacking Emerald Kaizo, I do find that it provided just enough of a boost to spice up the mainline games for me. Since for the most part the starters are some of the strongest encounters in any given playthrough, having to use them isn't a huge detriment. However, their status as a game over condition makes you always have in the back of your mind that a single mistake leads to the end of a run anytime you're using them for a particularly difficult battle. Meanwhile, being stuck with the same teammates until they die forces you to make use of some Pokemon that you might otherwise box after the early game, or potentially come up with strategies for handling major boss fights while you have dead weight hanging around. I spent the majority of the mid-game with a Vileplume on my team because it was the only answer I had into Brendan's Swampert. Meanwhile, it wasn't particularly useful on Flannery, so I was kinda just playing a team slot down. And of course, the option of sacrificing Pokemon in order to get to the specific one you want leads to some interesting decision making. Is it worth it to kill off multiple mediocre Pokemon in order to gain access to a single very strong one? Or potentially just one who is good into a very specific fight? Norman is notoriously cheesable by any Pokemon that has Protect or Dig, but I didn't think it was worth it to kill off the 4 Pokemon in between my team and a Sandslash just for a single boss fight. So instead I had to adapt a new strategy involving Toxic Stall. And lastly, the inability to go out of your way to kill someone off can lead to some really interesting and awkward teams. Because I couldn't find an opportunity to kill off Tropius against Wally without potentially sacrificing my Grumpig sweep, I ended up bringing one of the worst Pokemon ever made to the Elite Four, and I actually found some uses for him in the Steven Stone fight of all things. Now, obviously, this is a self-imposed rule set, and so if you want to do your own marlock, feel free to adjust it to have the rules reflect the type of playthrough that you want to go through. But I do think it's quite the fun way to put a fresh twist on a Pokemon game. And the day I'm recording this is August 7th, which is Shadow Dragon's birthday, so even though it will release a few days afterwards, I am considering the marlock to be my birthday present to Shadow Dragon. I know this is something that's very different from the type of content that I usually make, so I hope y'all enjoyed it. If you try a marlock for yourself, be sure to tell me what game you played it on and which generics became all-stars. For me, a Vileplume named Pendexa was the absolute GOAT, and I did ruthlessly sacrifice her to make room for someone else on the team, but I will never forget her contributions.